Hello, I'm Alessandro Pireno. I'm reporting in from SurrealDB in Brooklyn, New York. And today we're going to be doing our 26th stream, which we're going to be talking about integrating SurrealDB with LangChain for Gen AI apps. So I'd love to welcome you to this stream and introduce you to our esteemed friend, Karim Lalani, who's written a really interesting project which involves fashion, images, talking, and of course, Gen AI. So I'd love to also tell you a little bit about him. He's been contributing to SurrealDB for a while now, and with his contributions, we actually are realizing the power of LangChain and SurrealDB together. And he's also a world traveler. So I'd love for Karim to say a little bit more before we jump into the rest of the content.
Thank you, Sandro. It's been a great pleasure. I've been observing SurrealDB from a distance for quite some time. I've joined in a few streams, so to be a guest on this stream is a true honor. I really believe in the vision of SurrealDB. So to be able to contribute in any way, fashion, or form is really humbling.
Oh well, I'll throw that right back at you. We thank everybody who's contributing, especially someone as esteemed as you. So we can jump right into the project, I suppose, and talk a little bit about what it was and how you got there. Great. So basically, my understanding is that you were trying to figure out your wardrobe for your wife and you're traveling or something. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that project.
Yeah. So this is an interesting story. I was so NVIDIA had announced a Gen AI contest in collaboration with LangChain, and I wanted to participate. I put in my name in the hat, but I hadn't decided how to go about the process. And I was on a weekend getaway with my wife, and we were just catching up on stuff, housework, what we've been doing lately, and whatnot. And I went down this, I went over how I was spending a lot of time with building Gen AI stuff, learning about it. And I was stuck with, it's like I have all these tools at my disposal. What I'm missing is a vision, an idea. And I sort of gave her some examples of what people do with Gen AI and stuff. Okay, you can chat with your PDFs. You can, maybe bring in your company's knowledge base, and you can integrate that into your decision making and whatnot. And she was giving me that, and then she said, "Can it help me decide what clothes to wear to work tomorrow?" And that was sort of like a light bulb moment for me. It's like, what? That's why I love you so much. I have the skills, and you bring the ideas. We make up such a great pair. And that's where this idea for Style Guide sort of was born. The core idea being, go ahead.
Happy wife, happy life, as enabled by SurrealDB. I just
absolutely. I mean, SurrealDB has strengthened my marriage. I won't say saved my marriage, but it has definitely strengthened my marriage. Yeah. So the way the application, so basically what the application allows you to do is you can upload pictures of you wearing different clothes. The app will analyze the pictures, and it'll extract some interesting details about it, attributes about it, and it'll store it in SurrealDB. And then you can talk to the app, and you can say, okay, I have a meeting with some executives, suggest me some outfits. Or I am headed to a meetup with some of my friends discussing technology, suggest me some outfits. Or the example that I like to use is, okay, I'm going to on a vacation to the Mediterranean, what should I pack? And it'll come up with up to 4 suggestions. It also has some capabilities of looking up information on the internet, and then using that information as additional context in your searches. So I could ask, okay, what's the weather this evening? And then I could ask, suggest me something to wear on a date with my wife, and it would account the weather information that it retrieved from a web search into the overall search, so that the results are as relevant as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. So maybe we can just show a quick demo what this looks like, because I mean, it sounds like you're integrating not only LLMs but a whole lot of other functionality in one, which is pretty cool. So I think we have.
Show me red shirts. Show me formal wear. What should I pack for my vacation to the Mediterranean? And there you have it.
Very, very cool. So obviously this is a technology stream, so maybe we can just go into a little bit of how this stuff works and some of the main components.
Sure. So the idea, the core idea behind it is quite simple. You'll hear about people talking about RAGs or retrieval augmented generation. Most people's interaction with AI and LLMs has been through ChatGPT or through Cloud. You go there, you type in a question, and it'll respond with an answer. That's your typical Q&A flow, but it doesn't know about maybe your company's knowledge store. So I think then the idea came up with the assistants where you could upload your documents, and then when you ask questions, ChatGPT would refer to those for additional information for stuff that it doesn't have already in its training data. So that's basically the idea behind retrieval augmented generation. The core technology that I've used here to interact with the LLM to create this RAG chain is called LangChain. It's an AI framework that allows me to build applications. It has all the necessary abstractions that you would need when building AI applications that I would have otherwise had to code by hand. And then, of course, there's SurrealDB, because I need to store this data somewhere in a way that makes it usable within the AI application. I could not use I could have used a regular RDBMS, but then I would have somewhat limited capabilities. I would only be able to search based on attributes, some column values, or maybe some full text search. I went with SurrealDB because it has a vector data type, and embeddings are basically vectors. So that was a great way for me to sort of utilize SurrealDB in this project. Is instead of just storing the description about the outfits, I was able to store the embeddings as well, so that I could do semantic searches.
So in short, you're using, well, the technique is RAG, which we've seen a lot, and a lot of people talk about. It's the thing du jour. LangChain obviously is the framework for piecing all this stuff together. Makes sense. And using SurrealDB specifically for vector search, which is my understanding is how you take the text, or in this case, the description of a photo, encode it in such a way that you can use basically linear algebra to compare similarity between sentences or chunks of text. Is that a good summary?
No, absolutely. You're spot on.
Awesome. All right. Let's take a look at what this thing looks like and how it all comes together.
Sure. Yeah. So I mentioned about how you could upload photos, and it would analyze the photos. So this goes over a little bit of at a very high level how different interactions take place. So as a user, you would upload your photo to the application, and the first thing we do with the photos is we run a pass through a visual LLM. In this case, I use the Phi 3 vision model that was hosted, that's available on NVIDIA. And we ask it some specific questions about, okay, give me as much details about this as possible. What is the type of the outfit? What colors are prominent? Or even include information like, okay, what weather conditions this outfit might be suitable for. And we extract those features. We then send that information over to a second LLM pass because now what we've received is a paragraph of text with all of this information inside it. In order to be able to use that in a somewhat of a meaningful way, we need to basically convert that into JSON so that we can have individual, we can separate out individual attributes like the colors, like the name of the description, the weather, and all of those things. So we do a second pass at an LLM. In this case, if I'm not mistaken, I'm using Llama 3. We get back the response as JSON, and now that we have JSON, we can we can store all of those embeddings and that additional attributes that we received into SurrealDB, and that's the basically the photo upload workflow. Another thing to note is we're storing the embeddings for the description of the outfit. We are also storing the actual photo base64 encoded into the database itself, so we don't need to worry about a file store to manage that. Again, for the purposes of this application, that made sense. For something built at scale, there might be some other architectural considerations, but that's the architecture for the that's the workflow for the photo upload piece of style.
Very cool. So basically, at this point, you've uploaded your photos or adding new photos. We have content, and now it's ready to be interacted with an end user. And I take it This is how they interact.
Yes. So the application has voice capabilities. We use Whisper to transcribe user queries. That part is not visible here, but basically what ends up happening is I press the record button. I say, I put in my query, and then Style Guide would take that, it would forward that, the transcription along with any web history. Like I mentioned, we could do a web search as well. I could ask it, what's the weather? And it would store that information. So it takes that, it sends it to the language model to enrich it with the context, and then it creates a RAG query out of it. Basically it says, okay, I have this query. Before I answer it, I need some information. I need to see if I have relevant documents in my database that can be used to answer this. And it creates a query to SurrealDB. In this case, it's a similarity search. And SurrealDB will say, okay, based on the similarity search, here are 4 candidate documents for the top 4 candidate documents. And then we do a second pass with the LLM where it will look at it and it'll say, okay, here's my original query. Here's the data that I have from the database. Out of these 4, which are the best documents that answer the user's query? And it would sort of, and they could be those 4, it could be a shorter list. We then take the information, because we retrieve limited information on the first pass. So now we have the list of document IDs that match, that the LLM has decided that, these are the best matches. And then we do a second call to SurrealDB to fetch the actual photos. And then we pass them back to Style Guide to be rendered onto the application.
Wow, super cool. This is anything, when you're applying technology specifically to make your wife happy, like I'm pretty sure my wife just roll her eyes at this stuff, but I think the end result will be make her very happy. So the way I think would be an interesting way to think about it is like, how did you use these technologies specifically in this context? So how's SurrealDB?
Yeah, so SurrealDB supports vector searches, and I think when I was looking into when I was getting into Gen AI stuff, and I was learning about RAG and how vector stores fit in, I think right around that same time I was also looking at SurrealDB's documentation and vectors data types sort of jumped out at me, and that's when I started my initial experimentation with it. I've since then been using SurrealDB as a vector store for any of the projects that I do to enhance my understanding of Gen AI. So there might be some examples out there that might use ChromaDB or Pinecone, for example. And I would say, okay, now I see how they're using ChatGPT with Chroma or Pinecone. Let me see if I can redo that same code with another LLM and SurrealDB. And I've had great success with that. So that's why that's how sort of SurrealDB sort of fits into this. And plus, I mean, you have you can do a lot of things in a single database. So that's where the multimodality comes into play, right? I mean, I'm doing a RAG pass which does similarity search on embeddings, but then I'm also, when I'm retrieving the documents, I'm doing your traditional database operation of, select documents, this field where column equals, value. So I'm able to do that in a single database rather than, having a pure vector store to do embeddings with some additional metadata that I would then have to use and fetch more details from maybe another database. I have it all packaged nicely into one database. And so the LangChain ecosystem has a bunch of vector databases that they have integrations with. I didn't see one for SurrealDB because that was my first instinct, was to say, okay, SurrealDB has vector store. Let me see if LangChain has an adapter for it, a connector for it. And in the absence of one, I started going down the rabbit hole of, okay, what would it take to create an adapter or an integration into a third-party system that doesn't already exist? And I ended up creating the initial integration into SurrealDB for vector stores. And I submitted that to the LangChain project, and they graciously accepted my contribution. And now we have, I would call it an unofficial SurrealDB integration, but it works for this project and any kind of similar projects that you might have.
Well, thanks again for the contribution, and it looks like it's pretty easy to install based upon just tip. But by the way, housekeeping. I know we see some questions coming in. Thank you, but we're going to save questions for maybe a few slides after. But reminder, if you have any, I would suggest you just post them in now, and we'll try to get to all of them before the end of the stream. So we talked about SurrealDB. Let's go back into how you use it with LangChain. So
yeah. So there's a module under vector stores called SurrealDB Store. That's essentially what you need to add to your LangChain projects. You initialize it right now because the Python SDK only supports asynchronous operations on SurrealDB. That is the limitation. I think I do expose synchronous operations, but with some little bit of hackery, and it's not advisable to use that. It'll actually slow you down. But a simple example that uses LangChain with SurrealDB would look something like this. You have your vector store, from SurrealDB. You would have some sort of embeddings that SurrealDB supports. In this case, I went with Hugging Face embeddings for a simple fact that it's you don't need to install anything. You just need the transformers package, and it's there. You don't need to send anything off to an API. Everything runs locally, and you could use your knowledge base. In this case, we're using a text file. You chunk it up into different chunks, and you get essentially what are called documents. And these documents either have distinct chunks or overlapping chunks. When you add them to SurrealDB, what ends up happening is we create embeddings. We store the embeddings into SurrealDB, and then when you can do something like a similarity search, and the similarity search will do a cosine similarity search against those embeddings, and then it'll return the documents back to you.
Super cool. So why did you choose LangChain? I know you talked a little bit about this before, but maybe you can go a little more depth on anything we might have missed.
Yeah. So LangChain is is a cool project. I mean, they started out a couple years ago, right around the time when the AI hype was beginning to reignite with ChatGPT. It became very clear initially that yes, you could code against directly against these AI providers, but there's going to be more than one AI providers, and plus there are all of these best practices and abstractions that you're going to have to sort of work with, and that's where LangChain comes in. They've created these nice abstractions for prompt templates, for LLMs, chat models, for vector stores, and many other abstractions that you would, in one way or the other, need in your AI application. And there's a thriving community out there. They have a bunch of partner packages available, which are professionally built. So they have partner packages with OpenAI, with Anthropic, with AWS, with Microsoft, Google, anybody who's a player in the AI space. They have a partner package with them, which means that they have active development happening with those teams. And there's also a thriving community engagement. There's a bunch of stuff that exists that's not there because maybe the partnerships haven't been established yet, but somebody some developer needed that in their project, so they went in and they built those. Just like I built the SurrealDB integration for LangChain.
Awesome.
So yeah, and then the LangGraph, the agentic framework, which is the newest thing that they came out with, which lets you build agents. Basically convert your business workflows. Codify them as agents, and I really like the way it simplifies building agentic applications.
Yeah, no, my understanding is agentic ways of integrating multiple LLMs is the way of the future. So yeah, anything that makes that easy, well, it is very complicated, at least from my level. So I appreciate people who are solving this for us. And it brings us back to, well, why SurrealDB?
Yeah, so I've been following SurrealDB for quite some time. I think it started first popping up in my video recommendations on YouTube when I think Toby gave the talk of when SurrealDB switched from Go to Rust, and I was looking into Rust at that time. And then, of course, WebAssembly support was announced, and I was also looking at WebAssembly at that time. So SurrealDB just kept popping up in my streams. I looked into it. What I was most impressed with at that time was this was a cutting-edge technology that didn't require me to forget everything I knew before and start from scratch. What I mean by that is, SurrealQL is so easy to sort of learn because if you have any history with SQL, the syntax is so similar that you only have to learn a few additional things, if any. You could just use your SQL knowledge and get pretty far without having to get into the arrow syntax, and nested documents. Then there's the document store support, which is very similar to Mongo, which was the other NoSQL database that I had used in the past and was quite impressed with. And then recently, when I learned about, when I read a little bit more about the graph database side of things, support with SurrealDB. So it was essentially a convergence point for, I was doing a few, looking into a few different technologies, data storage technologies, and they kept sort of converging back into SurrealDB. So it sort of made sense for me to sort of continue to investigate further and experiment with it more. And with the vector data type, that, right around the time when I was looking into Gen AI, it's like, okay, I have a database that I really like. It has features that I need to build, the new wave of applications. It was just a perfect fit.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of that is a lot of folks who are discovering all the different models after they started using it for a different use case, which, our founders, that was their original pain. They had too many databases, and how do I only deal with one was like the first time I said. It sounds like you're running into that challenge and embracing the Surreal vision, as it were. So I'll just move on to say, like, well, why LangChain and SurrealDB? Like, how did that become like the thing together? It's like, peanut butter and chocolate. Yeah, Reese's.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was like, just I was interested in these two technologies, and there was an obvious overlap. Like I said, SurrealDB is so versatile. You could use it for your traditional as a traditional data store. You could use it as a graph database, and with LangChain, it just made sense to just combine the two together and see if something interesting comes out of it. And so far, I've been really surprised. So I'm involved in a local community, learning meetup group around LangChain called Austin LangChain. And every single time I've done a demo involving LangChain and SurrealDB, people have really been excited about it. It's like, look, oh, that's so cool that I could just do it in one place, or you could do this and that and that, and you have all of these capabilities. And I have to remind them that what I'm demoing is just a small piece of the entire picture. There's so much more that SurrealDB can do. But I have with my limited exposure to it, this is the best that I can come up with, and even that sort of continues to impress people.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a nice excuse for me to go down and visit Austin because, what an awesome city. So I'll definitely make it part of my mission to go down there and spread the good word. So we'll see you in Austin soon. And now we have some questions that came in via the QA thing. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a few. Let's just roll the punches. So I see this one. I think kind of address this early on, but so we can skip that one. Second one here. All right. Why choose an AI framework like LangChain? I think we kind of went over that, but it was instead of coding directly against LLMs. Maybe was there something specific that was like LangChain was doing the solve for coding directly against LLMs?
Yeah. So what I liked about LangChain was the abstractions that it was providing. That sort of, when you start building an application, an agentic application, you kind of run into these things you have to do yourself. And then you run into these concerns about, okay, I'm building today against ChatGPT. What if my manager tomorrow comes and says, oh, no, we're switching, maybe it's a little too expensive. Let's switch over to some other provider. Well, now I have to go back and I have to remove all of the, integration that I've done and now code new integration against, Claude, maybe. And, that could happen any number of times. Or, for instance, I start with ChromeDB. I use ChromeDB's SDK. And tomorrow we come back and say, you know what, we want to use Pinecode or we want to use SurrealDB. And while they do similar things, the interfaces may not be, the same, which means that you can't just plug and play. And I think that's where LangChain shines, is because you're using these abstractions. You have that follow these interfaces. It makes it a lot easier to sort of swap out components. Which would also another place where it shines, on the same note, is you could build a prototype application with a certain set of modules, and then when you're ready to take it to production, you could swap out those modules without necessarily breaking your application's flow. So the style guide application, for instance, it was built for NVIDIA's competition. So one of the requirements was to use NVIDIA's modules. But say my credits with NVIDIA expire, or maybe there's a new module a new LLM that comes out that does vision a lot better, but it's not available with NVIDIA anymore. I don't have to rewrite the application. I can just swap out those modules. Instead of Chat NVIDIA, I could use Chat OpenAI or Chat Olama, and it from the overall workflow perspective, my application looks just the same.
So you didn't have to recode
no
different API endpoints and all that stuff, and different variable names. It's just the API is the API or via
exactly.
SDK.
Yeah, and it's standardized, and and essentially best practices are emerging out of it. So now you start looking at new service providers, inference service providers. Now they're coming up with, now they're following these best practices to make it a lot easier to integrate into the LangChain ecosystem, because that's the easiest path to adoption.
So that was a question also came up. Someone's asking, how did you get started on contributing? Was it really hard? Did you have to know Rust at first? Because we talked about Rust. Was it something any developer can just start doing?
So my contributions have been mostly on the LangChain side of things, and LangChain is, they have a Python and JavaScript types SDKs. They have a very cool community. I was a little bit hesitant at first. I just packaged together the integration for SurrealDB and checked it in, and in a matter of a couple of days, I got feedback from the team asking me to sort of adjust my code a little bit to meet their coding style, and then to also provide some example code in the form of a Jupyter notebook so that it will be easier for people to adopt. So I have not made any contributions around Rust at the moment. I've not had the need to do so yet.
Okay.
But yeah, Python is what you need to get started with LangChain and SurrealDB.
Yeah, full confession, I still don't do Rust. I'm old school. I'm more of a SQL guy. And anyway, actually coming up on in terms of languages and whatnot, another question came up is, well, first, was the app actually mobile? Because I think it looked like a mobile thing. And so they were asking, what framework did you use? Did you consider something like Firebase that was an all-in-one solution?
Yeah. So the app is actually a web-based app. I went with WhatsApp's theme. That's why it looks that familiar.
Okay.
But it's no framework's been used to put together the app. It's a simple HTML, JavaScript, CSS setup. I found somebody had shared the WhatsApp theme that put together on one of the websites. So I acknowledged their contribution in the GitHub, and I referred back to them. But basically, I just started out with that theme, adjusted it for the UI. For the backend, it is a simple web server created with Python, with the SurrealDB and LangChain packages available, and essentially the web server code calls into the agent code.
Oh, that sounds even easier than what I remember having to do to jump through hoops to get even a web app out. But MVC is dead, long live React or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So this was done in a way that could, so you could swap out the front end with anything else. The back end is a WebRTC enabled web server, essentially, and WebRTC to support sound, audio input and output. So.
Oh yeah. All right. So what's next, Karim? What are you working on, and what's getting you excited about, future of all the things we talked about?
So I want to continue down, because I know lots of new stuff is sort of in the pipeline coming down, from SurrealDB side, and I want to sort of continue to work on the LangChain integration for SurrealDB, make it easier to sort of expose those newer features wherever they're applicable. I'm looking at potentially creating a small fine tune to allow creating SurrealQL from plain text. I noticed that language models sort of don't do so well because it's so similar to SQL. That when you ask ChatGPT or Claude to give you something, it'll give you something that looks like SQL, but SurrealQL, but it also uses a lot of the stuff from SQL, which doesn't apply anymore. It'll do joins and stuff, traditional joins, which they don't work with SurrealQL. So that is something that I have that I might work on in the future, and that in service essentially of so. There was this interesting thing that came into my feeds recently called LLM Graph Transformer. This is something that's available in LangChain's experimental package. Essentially, the idea being that you can extract a graph knowledge base out of your traditional, plain text knowledge base. So you're extracting entities and relationships, and then you're storing them into your graph database. And then the graph transformer would, convert your queries into graph database queries, essentially plain text queries into graph database queries to extract relevant information out, and then do RAG on it.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you've recently, Microsoft announced, Graph RAG. And they're not storing anything into the database. They're just storing like Parquet files on the file system. Those graph entities. Neo4j has done a lot of work in this space. The advantage that Neo4j has is because their queries are so different. The Cypher queries are so different from SQL. You can actually ask LLM and it'll give you sort of almost valid Cypher queries. So they have an edge here, and I was hoping to see if I could replicate that with SurrealQL. So
that'd be super cool. Yeah. Graph is definitely something that I'll call myself graph curious, because it's very hard to get your head around it unless you're an everyday practitioner. But it's so powerful.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interest in our meetup group as well around graph data stores and graph knowledge bases. So this would be one of those things like, okay, hey, you could use SurrealDB for this as well. So that's sort of like my selfish, motive behind that. There's something else that I recently discovered that LangChain published out. So when you're building agentic applications, there is an internal, because it's sort of like a state machine. It manages the state in an sort of like in memory. You can also attach persistence layer to that. So you could have like a Postgres database where it might store the current state of it. And where it becomes helpful is, if you want to build agentic applications with some human component in it, where it pauses at a certain stage, a human comes in, does some operations, and then it carries, from there, continues from there. I'm really interested to see if SurrealDB could sort of also play a role there. So there's an integration possibility with the persistent store for agent graph. And then there's, since SurrealDB also has a WASM runtime, you can run it in the browser, or you can run it within WASM runtimes. And LangChain has a JavaScript SDK. They recently, I sort of like came across, so what I found out was Google Chrome ships the ability to run the small models from Google, like Gemini Nano, in the browser itself, using WASM. And I was thinking, well, it would be interesting if you could build like a RAG application that runs in the browser itself without you needing to run what you call an actual server.
Yeah, so that'd be super cool, because especially with all the privacy concerns people have around this, like something that's completely contained on the client. It's very cool.
Yeah, and then Surreal could provide a rich database instead of your simple key value store. So that was something that's been on my plan side.
Super cool. All right, now I'll just jump in quickly to what's coming up with SurrealDB. So we're launching 2.0 imminently. It's already, we have some versions in alpha and beta. Mostly it's going to be around security enhancements. We're shifting how we do a lot of the security underneath the covers. The performance, engineering testing is going on. We're saying it's like another order of magnitude faster. It's going to be super fast. And we're also extending the SurrealQL functionality. A bunch of things like upsert are coming. So a lot of the stuff that people really appreciate in a modern SQL language, we'll just continue to extend our functionality there. But personally, what's getting me very excited is shortly after Surreal 2.0 comes out, some of our follow-up releases, this is all currently in development. We're going to support LLM functions, as Karim was mentioning, like in the database. So no API calls. Like you could, in theory, run, and I don't know the full list, but if you could go to your Hugging Face, all the open source models, you can run them as a function in database, which will be a really interesting thing. I can't wait to see what people are going to do with that. And the same goes with embedding functions. So you don't have to go out of database and make a HTTP call or even just an SDK call within Python. You can do it completely in SQL. And the other thing that gets me super excited as a database nerd, we're going to start supporting asynchronous indexing. So for those who aren't following the thread on indexing, what happens is when you do a write, so if you do an insert or an update, the indexes will have to be written at that time for a lot of database technologies. So we're going to allow people to just do the normal write to the underlying data and then process eventually the indexes. So your data will be there, it'll be available to be accessed. However, the performance impact of those indexes will be completely on the read, not on the write, which will solve a lot of people's problems for especially high concurrency applications. And those things are really getting me super excited. So I'm going to move forward and just remind everybody that we're launching the SurrealDB Cloud imminently as well. It's easy to get started. It performs at internet scale, and you can also scale it to zero. So if you're all interested in kicking the tires on SurrealDB and the cloud is the easier way to go, please join us today. We have a beta sheet that you can put in your info, and we'll reach out to you. And I think on that note, we're at time. Sorry, we have an extra minute. So, Karim, any final parting words for the people listening in?
Oh, no, this was great. Thank you for having me on it. I will let you know that there's a lot of excitement about Surreal Cloud in our group. If anybody in the audience is interested in learning more, participating, in learning together, whether it be how to build agentic applications or learn about what LangChain is, please look us up. We are Austin LangChain.
I will definitely be joining you guys out there. It's an excuse, as I said, to go there. But also, more importantly, remember, we have an active Discord community. Please join the community, contribute, check it out. And our GitHub, remember, we're open source. So as we were mentioning, anyone who wants to contribute, it's open. It's a really fun place to meet people who are either Rust heads or database heads, get to know everybody. So please join us. And on that note, thank you, Karim. It's been a pleasure. It's been great getting to know you, and been great to learn so much from you. And I'm looking forward to doing this again sometime.
Absolutely, pleasure's all mine. Thanks, Sandro.
Ciao.